Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 2. It's called Through the Valley, so full spoilers as always for the episode. The big thing that we were all kind of waiting on, if you've played the games, happened this episode, and that is the demise of Joel, which, I think a lot of us were cracking jokes about when we'd see the golf clubs, which they did use again. A couple of little changes and things here or there. Obviously, there's a big thing they added to this episode, which is the siege on the town. That is new. That was not in the game. But it kind of works as a fun way of having like all hell break loose as this Joel stuff is happening. It's kind of like this big cataclysmic thing where the town's in danger, and this is like a worst case scenario, but we see how well the town's defenses hold up. I think it was a pretty fun sequence and gave us some more bloater action and kind of, if nothing else, really sold us on the idea of how much Tommy and Maria care about each other. Because there was a lot of them kind of like, oh, this could be our last kiss. We're looking at each other concerned. One of us is in danger during the fight. There was a lot of that. And then obviously the Tommy actually luring the bloater away to focus on him and almost getting killed. The bloater finally dropping after all of his flame tank, his flamer fuel was depleted was a fun moment. If I have a critique, if I have something that'll say, hey, this is worse than the game, it's a very minor thing. It's not a big deal. But Abby does get more of a monologue in this episode than she did in the game. Because they kind of tweaked a little bit of dialogue. So Joel's pretty quiet for most of it, right? And that was true in the game as well. But the one thing Joel said in the game was, I mean, he may have said, hurry up and get this over with. I think he may have said that too. But he did also say, hurry up and say whatever speech you've got prepared. And then we don't actually get to hear like some big speech. He's kind of like, goading her on to just get it over with. And that sort of spirit is still there from Joel in the episode, but Abby does make a speech. We do get her kind of monologuing, kneeling down, talking about having a code and being in a militia and stuff. And I don't think it needed that. I think it maybe just drew that out a little bit much in a way that I don't think added anything. Mainly just because it felt a bit hokier than everything else. I think she like Kaitlyn Deaver's doing a good job with the performance. I like the way she's handling the character, but I think that scene felt like they'd given her a lot more kind of tropey dialogue to deliver, and it kind of just stuck out to me as being a bit weaker than everything else in the episode. Because the moments that were great in the game, which is so she runs into Joel when she's in trouble running from the Horde. That's from the game. The big change here, though, is that Joel was with Tommy in the game, because in the game, Tommy didn't have to be at the town defending the town. So Tommy was with Joel, and Dina and Ellie were on patrol, and Jesse was back at the town. So they kind of swapped some characters around. But that's okay, because they gave us the Dina-Ellie bonding patrol in episode 1. We got that already. So they kind of shuffled things around in a smart way in that sense. But, so Joel ends up helping Abby, right? Saves her when she's getting chased, and Abby sort of lures them back to the lodge, the ski lodge up in the mountain. And that moment when they get inside and Abby makes a point of saying that man's name is Joel, and the way they all freeze because they realize what's about to happen and they realize that it's here. That moment's great, and it was great in the game as well. I think they really nail that. I also think they really emphasized in this episode the luck they had in getting him out here on his own this way. Well, Dina was there too, but like relatively on their own. Because they spend a lot of time at the start of this episode with them looking at the town, especially when they wake up in the morning and they see how big it is and just how well defended it is. And they're like, hey, they've got guard posts, they've got patrols, they've got weapons, they've got electricity, they've got all this stuff, they've got dogs. This is seeming impossible. And even if we did somehow get past all of these things, we don't even know where Joel is inside. And Abby, like, quite quickly starts talking about, like, kidnapping a patrol and making them talk. And I think the couple of things this does is, like I already said, it kind of sells how lucky they were to, like, have Joel just fall into their laps. And I say lucky. Abby was lucky, relatively speaking, because it's quite clear the rest of them are having second thoughts. They even talk about how the plan now is to talk her out of it and just go home. They don't think this is worth it. But the other thing that it really does is they really emphasize how much they don't want to hurt anyone else. That they don't want to like torture anyone. So when Abby suggests let's kidnap someone and make them talk, she's like, hey, we'll just bluff. We won't actually hurt them. And then immediately Owen's like, but what happens then if they don't talk? Like, we don't want to do that. And I think that was good. That was a nice little addition, just purely because in the game, if there's one thing you could critique in the whole bit where Ellie comes in, they pin her down and she has to watch Joel die, is there is kind of a like, why did they leave her alive? Especially when she's yelling out, I'm going to kill you all, right? Like, maybe they have made a bit of an error here. And I think this really sells the idea that most of the team really don't want to hurt anyone else. They don't want to kill anyone else. They're not even that comfortable with Joel being tortured the way he is. They kind of want it to be quick, even though Abby always said she wanted it to be slow. It clearly sells the conscience of the rest of the team and that they're not actually that into this, but they've promised Abby, they're here, and they're going through with it. And even if they thought they wanted it as well, I think they're questioning it a little bit and maybe facing some tough realizations in the moments when Abby's torturing them and enjoying hitting them with the golf club over and over. I also enjoyed that they kept in the gunshot to the leg first, because that was like the brutal part where you realized in the game, oh, he's actually in trouble here. This isn't just going to get deflated. He has been, at the very least, he is permanently injured from this, because he's always going to have trouble walking now because he gets shot in the knee. So I think that staying in here was a really good idea as well. So all of this stuff, I think, is mostly really well handled. I love the little additions to their conscience and really emphasizing they don't want to hurt anyone else. It comes less out of nowhere when they just leave and don't kill Ellie, because it's like, no, none of them want to do that. They don't want to hurt Dina. In fact, at one point, Abby threatens to kill Dina if Joel won't be honest with her, and the rest of them are like, wait, what? No. So I kind of like the idea as well that in that moment, Joel is aware enough, and he basically figures out they're military and that they're probably ex-Fireflies, and he guesses all that. It makes sense he has the knowledge to deduce that. But I also really like the idea that he probably also can recognize that this is real, that Abby is serious about this, and that there's not going to be any talking her out of it, regardless of any reservations or hesitations that are coming from everyone else in the room, where they're clearly less comfortable. I think he knows, looking at Abby, what she intends to do, and that she is going to do it, and there is no talking her out of it. There's no wiggling out of it. I think he can recognize the determination and the bloodlust, if you will, on her face, because he's felt that himself. He's recognizing some of himself in there to some extent. So I think that stuff is really well handled. It's funny because I was playing a little bit more of the game since last episode. Not too much, but I played a little bit more. Funnily enough, I ran into the Stalkers for the first time on this replay through. The right after I said last time they didn't appear till later, which was true. I'm like 9-10 hours into the game in this playthrough. But what's interesting is I've been getting more flashbacks and stuff, so it's interesting filling out some more of that in my memory. But you know, they kind of talk, like Jesse early on in the episode kind of brings up, hey, what's going on with you and Joel, or, you know, starts asking if they're okay. And Ellie kind of indicates that they're fine, but won't elaborate, and is just kind of annoyed that anyone's asking. One of the things that I was really holding back when I talked about the first episode was the idea of all the complex feelings and guilt that are going to come up when Joel dies because of how Ellie's been with Joel, right? This idea that she has had this really cold relationship recently, that she has been holding out some sort of grudge, and it's been really awkward. Joel's been really struggling and feeling like he can't get through to her. She's been alienating him, right? And I think that adds a lot of like extra guilt to her now that she's seen him die, and that for the time they had together, however long this uncomfortable period was, she wasn't really appreciating that she had him in her life, and probably further drives her quest for revenge, which I don't think it's spoiling anything to say that she wants to kill these people, and that is her goal now. I won't say anything else, but that is clearly what she wants. And it's interesting, of course, because Abby's whole thing was a quest for revenge for her father, and now Ellie, her surrogate father, has now been killed by Abby, and now she wants revenge. There's a cycle of revenge and violence that is perpetuating here, and that's very much what the big themes of The Last of Us Part 2 were. So it's really fun to be able to get to all this stuff and start kind of like going down that path. It's going to be really interesting watching the rest of the show now, and how it's structured, because fundamentally this not quite finishes the opening prologue of the game, because there's still like the leaving town part to go. But pretty much once like we're past this section of the story in the town, the way the game is structured is that it follows just one character's side of it for a long time, and then eventually goes back and follows the other character. And I think that's not going to happen here. I think we're going to be cutting between the characters. So we're going to have this interesting situation, if you've played the second game, where parts of like the second half of the game are going to be getting adapted along with some of the early first half of the game. But we're not going to have some of the middle yet, because we're not going to have been there, especially since this is only 7 episodes and it's not all of the game. I need to emphasize that again. This is not the full second game in this season. They've said that it's going to be at least 2 seasons to adapt the second game. So I'm really fascinated to see how they handle that, and like how much we jump back and forth. Do they do just a straight one full episode of one character, one full episode of the other, and go back and forth that way? Or is it more just a sort of natural intercutting where appropriate and going from there? Very, very interesting to see how they play with that. So yeah, like the handling of the death is good. The sound drowning out the song from the game that Ellie's singing about walking through the valley, that's the perfect ending point, really. And of course, this is also, as we're seeing, the aftermath of the town stuff, where they have kind of won. They've taken out the infected, they've saved the town, there's a lot of damage, they've lost some people, of course. And they really emphasized early on as well, like what the protocol is with if this happens, which is, young and elderly go into basements, barricade the doors, everyone who can fight is up on the rooftops or at the barrier and trying to take things on. And we see them like roll barrels out and set them on fire and all kinds of things. It makes for a lot of action. I think it's mostly a good fun time that kind of is a nice contrast to the raw emotion of the Abby Joel stuff, which is playing out on the other side of the plot. So as far as anything else goes, the other things they kept from the game, of course, is early on when they get the what's his name, Seth, to apologize. Like Maria forces forces maybe isn't the right word, but clearly has spoken to Seth and made it clear that he needs to apologize to keep the peace. And he's made them a sandwich for their patrol, and Ellie's uncomfortable and being kind of tough about it and doesn't really want to give in and just say thank you. I think it's a good little scene thematically for what the story is, because like I said, the story's all about revenge and holding grudges and not letting things go. So just this little simple transgression, right? And he's a dick, don't get me wrong. He's an absolute dick as Seth. But this idea that he's made this apology, and well, I think we can all maybe speculate that he doesn't really mean it and he's just saying it because he's supposed to and whatever else. The idea that Ellie can't let it go and is still holding a grudge is a nice thematic foreshadowing of the bigger things she's not going to be letting go as the season progresses. So simple little things like that, and that was in the game as well. Smart little. I think that's there. Eugene's place, his garden, we'll call it. That was in the game too. Although that was actually a scene with Dina in the game, between Ellie and Dina, and they got kind of smoochy there. And then eventually Jesse showed up after that, but he wasn't on patrol with them. The storm was in the game though. The snowstorm coming in was part of the whole thing, and it was the confusion of that and having to, like, we can't go back to the town because the storm's too bad, and that's why Joel and Tommy go to the lodge. They did need obviously a witness there, because it's kind of important that Dina has heard a few things. Obviously she gets knocked out relatively early in the scene, but she does hear a few key things about who they are and where they're from, I think. Definitely the Firefly part, maybe the Seattle part, but she definitely heard some stuff which is going to help with where to aim Ellie's anger going forward. And in the games, that was Tommy. Tommy heard all that stuff. So they kind of swap things around. I said in the first episode, though, that I really liked that Dina and Joel had a little bit more of a relationship, so that she also cared about him. And likewise, I think Joel looking out for her and trying to warm her up here before everything started happening, and then being concerned for her was quite good. If anything, I thought they might even go a little bit further, and like when Abby says, "Oh, tell the truth or she dies," I thought it might have been interesting if Joel still didn't tell the truth. The idea that he's kind of not willing to give that up, even if it means saving Dina. That's kind of an interesting concept. They didn't really go into. Obviously, he doesn't really admit too much. He just kind of admits that he was at Salt Lake City, and then he just kind of hears Abby say everything else. I want to say that in the game, Abby doesn't reveal that the doctor was her father until later. You know, I think that was something that came up down the line in the game, but they kind of already hinted at it heavily in episode 1. And I know some people didn't like that in episode 1. Like, obviously, I didn't know this when I recorded the review last week, but there's definitely a little bit of a negative sentiment to her kind of like up front voicing what she wants to do, and that she lost someone in the Firefly hospital back in the end of the first season. I didn't mind that, just purely because the way it's concealed in the game, I don't think would work in a TV show. You could have maybe like kept the idea that it was the Doctor character till later, but and arguably yes, her monologue, which includes this exposition, is probably the weakest thing in the episode. But I also don't think that you could keep all of it back as much as you did in the game itself, because the game holds that back for quite some time. Like I say, I'm about 10 hours into a replay, and I don't think I've got to the reveal of that yet. It's kind of weird though remembering this stuff sometimes, because I already knew it from the first time I played the game, and you know, like it's almost possible that I could gloss over it because I already know it when it comes up. But it's you know, this is such an interesting thing to watch be adapted for me, because like I'm not a big book reader. I wish I was, but I just don't have the time. I like too many other things. So a video game like this, which I have played and love, is kind of the closest I get to that feeling of like really knowing something and having my opinions of how things were handled in the source material and all that, and watching it kind of play out. And I think to the credit of the show, like I would say 8 or 9 times out of 10, when it changes something or adds something, it's usually for the better, because it understands that it's a different medium, it's TV, you have to do certain things, you can't necessarily rely on some of the same tricks. A good example is, in the game, you play as Ellie, like, racing to the ski lodge, and you know, because you've already seen some of the scenes with Abby and Joel, what's happening, but Ellie doesn't know that. So you're actually going through the building, and you hear his screams, but you don't know, she doesn't know what it is, and there's like a build-up of tension that's sort of dangling in front of you. And the game does that a few times in big sequences, where you know what the character's going to find, because it's already showed you from the other perspective, but your gut's kind of wrenching because you're building up to it. And they do a little bit of that here. You see Ellie hear the sounds and like go to open the door, but it's much more truncated here than in the game. The game really milks it. And the game can do that because you have to play all these sequences, and you have to like that feeling of like choosing to move forward when you feel gut wrenched is really powerful. It's something that Naughty Dog have become very good at, with how they balance the gameplay and how the gameplay is affected by the narrative, and vice versa. Like they do a lot of really smart things of like the fact that you have to interact here when you feel this way. How does that change how it feels, or how does that impact how it feels to play, and so on. There's a lot of that going on in modern Naughty Dog games, and I think, you know, my biggest complaint from the finale of season 1 was how the shootout in the hospital felt. It was the one thing where I felt it didn't match what I felt when I played the game, and I think them having to make these decisions, and how do we translate this moment and that moment. Now, some things translate very well one-to-one, where you can just take the scene from the game and it just works, and that's an example of the dance from last episode. For the most part, the apology in this episode, or even the death of Joel, even though the big monologue in the middle's added, like, the actual key moments for the most part are pretty similar. Although they did add the bit here where the broken golf club stabs him. I'm pretty sure in the game she just hits him in the face with a golf club a few more times, and that's how it wraps up. So they made it a bit more definitive with like a single thing here, which is cool. So yeah, lots of interesting adaptation choices, which for the most part I really like. It's kind of fascinating seeing how they do it. Just as someone who enjoys movies and TV in filmmaking and like how to write stories and make them work. The changing of the one medium to the other, in this case, because I'm so familiar with the original, is really interesting to see play out. Anyway, what else should I be talking about here? I feel like this one has less to talk about because it kind of ramps up to all this big stuff, and then all the big stuff happens because you get a lot of runtime for the siege and like all the monsters and the runners and whatnot breaking in. They really did emphasize this idea of the infected coming out from under the snow, and the idea that they're kind of buried under other dead infected to try and stay kind of warm. Insulated was the word they used. And those scenes where they're all coming out of the snow did look pretty cool. And you sort of see that the clickers' heads, they were just kind of hanging out above the snow. And then you start to see all the snow break away and all these runners come out. Obviously, there's a lot of effects in this episode, and that's always something that is a risk for a TV show. Although TV shows definitely have a lot better effects in these big prestige things than they used to. Honestly, for the most part, it looked great, but we had obviously big sequences here of like hundreds, if not thousands, of infected storming the town, and I think it looked pretty good. I'm not saying it looked perfect, but for a TV show, it was definitely very high caliber. Honestly, the only time I kind of noticed an effect that felt a little off, just because of the movement, is when they're later on in the siege where it's Maria like unleashes the dogs and they're all sort of running and jumping on the infected. That's pretty much all CG for the movement, it looks like. At least the dogs are, and maybe the infected are as well at that point, just because maybe it was hard to match up a CG dog with a stunt person or actor in the makeup. But like some of the movement there felt a little uncanny valley, and I was kind of noticing that. But by and large, the effects were pretty nifty. And obviously there's some tension in the episode from like, oh, we don't know where Joel and Dina are. They're out there somewhere. And, Ellie and Jesse kind of like put themselves in danger to go find them. And Tommy knows that Joel isn't responding and he's kind of concerned and wants that dealt with. But he's kind of too busy focusing on the town to care about it, which might also make him feel guilty, actually. He might feel a little responsible that he wasn't there to go and help his brother because this town stuff was all happening. Maybe he'll feel conflicted and pulled one way or the other on that. So there's a lot of things at play here that I'm excited to see all these big moments that I know are coming up from the game. And it's honestly it's kind of special to have such a big budget prestige and for the most part very well written adaptation of something like this. Just because it feels like you're seeing it come to life in a way. And obviously video games are so beautiful now, and Last of Us 1 and 2 fall into that category for sure, that you don't necessarily need to have a live action version to make it work, but they keep doing just these cool, like, interesting little things to it, and just the way you see it play out is very exciting. As soon as they sold me on the casting, and after I watched the first episode of season 1 and I got into the casting of both Joel and Ellie, I noticed I was starting to get excited about seeing them react to certain things that I knew were coming and see how they portrayed those reactions. And I think that's something that's still here. And obviously this episode's a big example of that with Ellie seeing the death of Joel. So yeah, big stuff. No, I'm super pumped. It was a big action-packed episode, lots of big emotion, lots of big character developments. They didn't milk the Joel death for too long. I know some people thought they might even try and like set an entire 7-episode season in the town and have him die at the end of the season. And that would have been too much, I think, milking, unless they just, because they would have had to basically make up almost entirely new story for most of it. Because, the Joel death in the game is like the first hour, right? It's very early on. So I think they added just enough to flesh things out, and now we can get going into, what the main thing is. Because Joel's death is the inciting incident of the story. That is what's going to drive everything else that we're going to get to. And which was fine for me, because I knew that. I knew, like, that's where this was building to, and that everything was coming after. I do wonder, for someone who's not played the game, if they felt like after episode 1, there wasn't, like, a clear direction for the season yet. Because technically they're right, because the clear direction didn't come until the end of episode 2. But if you've played the game, you knew that's what it was building to. And as long as they didn't milk it too much, it wasn't a problem. So, anyway, that is my thoughts on episode 2 of The Last of Us season 2, and I am fascinated to see what they do with episode 3. So I will see you for that next time. You can, of course, support the channel and all the reviews both here and over in Male Fuzz Movies, where the movie podcasts live. Do please go check out those if you haven't. I do a sci-fi movie review podcast over there, a horror movie review podcast, and like a franchise movie review podcast. There's 3 podcasts a week typically over there. They're very in-depth. Please do check them out. But that is me. Support on Patreon or YouTube membership. Any support is greatly appreciated in any form. Thank you very much for joining. I'll see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?